Yeah. Okay, the Jentry Podcast. I know that you will be loving it. We here to break it down so that you start to understand your local government. Who are the leaders? Time to get active, do something about it. Dealing with jobs, the workforce, and affordable housing. Motivate and inspire. Elevate, take it higher. For the next generation. Knowledge is power for your community. Giving you the info that you really need. Time to make a change and a difference. Tune in, don't miss it. It's the Jentry. The Jentry Podcast. The Jentry Podcast. Making a change, switching it up.
Okay, welcome to the Jentry Podcast. Today we have an incredible guest. This person inspires me. I've got a chance to look him up, everything from what he does. David Shane Johnson is the economic director of Cedar City and Iron County in Utah. Utah is at the top of my list always, as they are for innovation and everything that they do. And David is no small part of that. But furthermore, he is a father of 4 and might be the father of the fittest family in the nation. All runners. He's an avid runner, and they all tend to win their age group. So to get more into his personal life and also into the great work he's doing in Utah, we have David here. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan, for having me. You've done some good internet stalking on me. Nice work. That's awesome. Yeah,
but
family keeps you busy for sure.
Got you inspired to pursue a career in economic development. How did you get there, and what keeps you showing up every day?
Wow, that in and of itself is a very long story. I don't think any little boy growing up thinks I'm going to be an economic development director. I think 80% of adults that I talk to don't and this isn't knocking on anyone. I think 80% of people that I talk to don't really know and understand what an economic development director does, what the job is. And, I typically tell people my job is essentially to create jobs. My job is to help recruit and retain business, to create jobs and benefit the economic viability of the community or the area or the region, depending on what your role is in economic development. Speaking of what you want to be when you grow up, so my goal as a little boy was actually to be the youngest president of the United States. I wanted to be JFK with that title. And my whole life goal was to actually run, it was 3 presidencies ago, so that I would turn 35 and then the inauguration would happen. And then I would be the youngest president, but life doesn't quite look like that. So with all that said, my real career, I started off in public relations. Okay. As a public relations professional. I went out and worked in Washington, D.C., actually, and I've been a campaign manager for politics and things like that. But ultimately, I decided that I didn't really want to be the politician. And so I went into nonprofit management for a while. And then I had a buddy who was a city manager that said, man, with all your public relations experience and background doing government contracts and things like that, he said, you should actually look into being a city manager. And I looked into it more with my master's degree in public administration, my undergrad in public relations. And I thought, man, this is really what I wanted to do in politics, really, was more helping the community. And I was a city manager for a little while, and I've done economic development, and I was a city manager, and now I'm back to economic development. And I've realized economic development is the fun stuff. When people are upset about any number of things in any community, there's something different in each community. Few people really get upset about creating jobs, creating more places to eat, creating more places to shop, as long as it's done in a balanced way and is it something that benefits the community. So my role really is to look at what does the community want? What are elected officials trying to do for their community? And so I got into economic development, and that was a very scattered way of going through my career, but I've got into economic development with the idea that I can help my community in a broad way and focus in on those positive things. Economic development, depending on your state, if your state generates sales tax, I mean, that's huge for the retail side. And then property tax most states generate, or should all generate, from what I understand. And so what you do in economic development is you diversify those tax revenues, the different types of tax revenues between property and sales and other forms, depending on where you're at. But the idea is that I'm diversifying the portfolio to have more stable economy in the areas where I'm serving. So, sorry, that was a really long description to that first question.
No, that's definitely what we want. And you hit on a few things that are very important. Our goal here is to make sure that we're making local, city, state, and politics accessible for especially millennials and Gen Z, just making them more aware and bringing them into the fold. Could you explain what a city manager really is?
Yeah, for sure. Before I actually went out of being the city manager and then back into economic development, I was actually one of only, I think, 23 city managers in the state that was internationally credentialed. I was a candidate for credentialing, which essentially meant I just needed a little more service time, and then I'd be fully credentialed by the International City Managers Association. A city manager, think of it this way: a government is like a corporation. I know government runs differently because public financing is done differently, and public budgeting is done differently than a corporation because of transparency laws, and quite honestly, the need to be transparent as a public entity. But to put it this way, a mayor in most cities, the majority of cities across the country, the mayor is usually a part-time or lay individual, meaning they volunteer to do that for their community. Big communities like Chicago or Salt Lake City, you have a full-time mayor that comes in and runs the city, right? And then you've got your city council members. But in most cities, it's structured kind of like a corporation where you have your board and your chair. And the chair is like the mayor and the board is like city council. And in most cities, the board and chair hire a CEO or a city manager. And so the city manager is over hiring and firing. And the parameters around the city manager may be dependent on city ordinance or state legislation or a mix of both. But essentially, city manager is the CEO of the organization, making the day-to-day decisions. And here's what's ironic. In those big cities that have a strong mayor, meaning a full-time mayor, they still hire a city administrator, which is essentially just a city manager that runs the day-to-day, kind of like a chief of staff to the president of the United States. And so a city manager is helping make those day-to-day decisions. And then the city council and the mayor, very similar to a corporation, they're the policy makers. They're the ones giving strategic direction of what they want to see. And then, of course, the investors in a city are your residents, your community members, who then voice their concerns to the council and the mayor, and as well as staff as well. So, there's your city management 101. My fellow city managers can add to or take away from or disagree with my assessment there, but that's a good analogy for kind of the lay person to be able to better understand. And most people think that that your town mayor's in there making every little decision. Sometimes in very small communities, there's not a city manager. But in most of your mid-sized communities, there's a city manager that's hired, and they're a contract employee. So if a new council came in and wanted a new CEO or a new city manager, the council could come in and say, "Thank you for your time, city manager," and appoint someone else. They have the authority to do that.
That was a great assessment, and the analogy you made was very important, and I hope everybody hears and internalizes that on a couple things. One, the investors are the people, and I think sometimes we get lost in that, but I want everybody to know that you are so important to the piece of your local government. So I love the way you kind of set that out. And then you also, when you were first speaking, you made economic development almost sound easy in a lot of ways. But in the next part, you spoke about strategic priorities. I know there can be a balance that you have, and certain people want this, certain stakeholders want this, certain entities want this. So what are the top strategic priorities in Cedar City, and how are these determined? You kind of spoke a little bit to it already.
Yeah, Cedar City has a real diverse economy. The strategic priorities are diverse. And I should couple this by saying I am technically an employee of Cedar City, but my office is funded by Cedar City and Iron County. So I help do economic development for the unincorporated portions of the county. Some of the priorities are diverse. Well, the priorities are diverse. So we have historically, there was kind of a mining town here. And when some of the mining declined in the east, manufacturing came in and really stepped up. Historically, there's been agriculture, and also historically tourism. So a lot of people may have heard in Utah a marketing campaign that's been going for quite a long time, which now has changed a little bit, but the marketing campaign used to be called the Mighty Five. We have 5 national parks here in Utah, and Cedar City was once named by Union Pacific, because that's train is how people got to the national parks back in the day. Cedar City was dubbed the gateway to the parks. So Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon National Park, and then here we also have Cedar Breaks National Monument. So I also have a podcast that I do to kind of promote economic development stuff going on in the area. And I actually just did an interview with the superintendent of Cedar Breaks National Monument, where she dives in what's the distinction between monument and national park. But getting back to your original question, I would name a few things. We have, and forgive me my uhs here, trying to think. We have manufacturing, we have tourism, we have retail, we have energy, we have a historic downtown. And then one that a lot of people don't consider as economic development, but plays a vital role in economic development, is higher education. So we have a D1 university here with over 16,000 students, as well as a technical college, and they help feed our pipeline for our manufacturing. One of the issues that we've had historically here is kids grow up generationally here and go to school, and then they have to move away. And so that's why I say part of my role, part of my job is creating jobs. So I am trying to create jobs so those generations of residents, their kids can stay here. And so we've got a few different areas, and I kind of highlighted those. I don't know if you want me to kind of dive into each of those little pods and maybe some of the highlights in some of those categories.
I think a highlight or two. Like, I'd love to hear about like an initiative or a project that you're particularly like proud of, and like what's the impact. And I know for many economic developers, it's so difficult from a jobs perspective to matching housing. When you're married with one child versus multiple children, you need the dog, the picket fence, 2-car garage, to now you're retiring, all the kids are out, even just from real estate, let alone the job. So yeah, if you just anything initiative or project that you're proud of, and it could be multiple. It seems like you guys are doing a lot.
Yeah, well, I've been here about a year now, and my predecessor, he took a job. He did, his name's Danny Stewart. And when he was here, he was really focused in on manufacturing and building out manufacturing, which we still definitely are. But he was so successful in building out manufacturing that he worked with the state to create the first rural subport of the Utah Inland Port. Now, the Utah Inland Port is, if you think of a port like in LA or, somewhere where things are importing and exporting. An inland port is basically a hub where things are importing and exporting.
Okay.
And Utah formed an inland port. Well, it's been ongoing for the last several years, and it's been up and down of what the organization looked like, what purpose it served, etc. And finally, with new leadership, the Utah Inland Port, and I'm talking global now, and then I'll kind of break it down. The Utah Inland Port essentially functions kind of like another funding mechanism. So, for example, like an RDA can provide incentives within a certain boundary. And so the Utah Inland Port, which was up in Salt Lake City in that area, but run by the state, formed what I call subports throughout the state. And Danny, my predecessor, he helped create the first rural inland port in the state right here in Iron County. It's called the Iron Springs Inland Port. And this goes along with something that I've said ever since the inception of the inland port, that every inland port needs subports, needs spokes to the wheel to make it successful. And that can be applied, that analogy can be applied to a lot of different industries and things as well. But with the inland port, that was essential. So I think it's been maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, that rural inland port was formed, the first one in the state. And now there are a total of 12 rural inland ports throughout the whole state.
Wow.
And so when I talk about a success, I've never claimed successes as my own because, as I say, every accomplishment David Johnson's ever made has been based on bringing the right people to the table. And Danny is a great example of that, of him connecting with the right people, bringing them to the table and creating this inland port. Now, what that's done is initially the inland port brought in Savage, which is a international transportation company, ships, rail, trucking, etc., which actually started in Utah. And then it also brought in Building Zone Industries, known as BZI. They started as a steel erection company that greatly expanded. I think they now have 7 companies under their umbrella. And they started just as some farm boys that erected steel to build barns. And then they got bigger projects with Amazon. Right now, they're working on a huge Hyundai plant in Georgia. That's an amazing project for that area. BZI is headquartered right here, and they've created a project area within that inland port. And between Savage and BZI, there's about 900 acres. But since that inception, in the last year and a half or so, 2 other industrial parks have also come up and have also amended the inland port area to include their manufacturing sites. So that brings us just within the inland port only, about 2,300 acres of greenfield. And then that doesn't include another entity called Port 15, which is manufacturing, plus a lot of other manufacturers that aren't in industrial specific sites. If there's one thing that I'm proud of here, it's how much manufacturing has grown. Cedar City, Iron County is within 1 day's trucking of most major Western markets. Our accessibility to the major Western markets is comparable to the accessibility of Las Vegas or Salt Lake City, or greater in some extent, depending on the different routes that are needed. So that's one thing I'm really proud of. Another thing that I'll dive into, which is complete 180 in economic development, is, well, I'll touch on 2 things with this. One is the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Oh, okay.
Utah Shakespeare Festival is ranked the 3rd Shakespeare Festival in the world, located right here in Cedar City. It's Tony Award-winning Shakespeare Festival, which brings thousands of people every year. I remember in high school, I grew up in the military, and in high school, my teacher in Arizona would drive students up to the Shakespeare Festival every summer. And I always wanted to go. So it's just so awesome for me to be here. And they're wonderful partners. Anytime I'm trying to recruit a business, I take them to the Shakespeare Festival and just show off the behind the scenes. And people are just always enamored, floored by what we have here. And that's just scratching the surface on our tourism and the amazing quality of life. Like I said, we have the national parks. We have a ski resort, which is within Iron County. And I always joke that within a day's time, you can ski on our ski resorts and then drive south to our neighbors in Washington County and ski on the water in 1 day's time.
What?
Right temperature going on. Because right here in Cedar City, we're about 5,800 feet. The ski resort is 10,000 plus. And then our neighbors just south of us, they're at about 2,000 feet. So they're sunshine year round. So you can live here and have your snow and fun, or you can have your sunshine as well. Another aspect in the tourism, and this kind of meshes both the manufacturing and the tourism, actually it meshes everything, was that podcast that I talked about that I have. So the visitors, the Visit Cedar City, Brian Head, Office of Tourism or Bureau of Tourism contacted me and said, "Hey, Dave, we want to start this podcast to promote the amazing tourism opportunities that we have here in business and things." And so, long story short, we put our heads together and we said, well, okay, let's do this podcast. I can host it because I like to joke, an economic development guy is the hype guy for the community of why you should be here. Here's all the great things happening, why you should bring your business here, and here's the quality of life that you can expect here. So that podcast is like my ultimate opportunity to be the hype guy. And so I've had like BZI's been on my podcast. We like the superintendent of the national park, local ski shop, a bakery. We've had just a variety of things on our podcast. So that's really fun to be able to do that. And the tourism is exceptionally fun. We have a historic downtown with a historic Main Street designation with just the quintessential little shops. And we're known as Festival City, USA. And part of that is because of the Shakespeare Festival. But we put on tons of festivals. We have a half marathon that we do that runs down the mountain, and it's downhill, run the whole way. So if you want to run and get a fast time, come run the Cedar City half marathon. So I'm really all over the board right now in the things I'm sharing with you. And that's because we have such a diverse portfolio of economic development opportunity here. It's just hard to capture it all. In fact, we just recently did a promotional video about all those things, and my producer said, nobody's ever taken all these multiple elements about Cedar City and put them into one package and said, here it all is, meaning in a video package. And so we just recently did that and put it on YouTube, put it on all of our social media. And it's just so fun to be able to just brag and be the hype guy, I guess. I feel like I'm talking a million miles an hour at you, Jonathan. So you just interject. There you have other questions or things you want to dive into.
The one thing in every industry that I love is passion, and it oozes through you that you are passionate about Cedar City.
Yeah, it's a great community. I joke I'm Goldilocks. Like, I've went to these other places and I really like the outdoors here and I really liked the growth here, but Cedar City is just right.
Just right.
Balance of everything you want. So
no, I love it and I appreciate it. And everything that I've been able to glean is the multiplicity of opportunity. And one thing that brings up for me is one aspect of economic development, running a city, is utilizing your capital and utilizing incentives. So how do you approach deciding like which projects receive subsidy or tax incentives, and like what factors influence your decision-making process?
Yeah, that's great. Typically, as I think any responsible economic development professional should do, ultimately the decision is the elected officials, right? If they want to incentivize a project. And so part of my job is to be a buffer and to say, okay, how many jobs are you bringing in? What's the water usage, which is a big deal here in Utah and the West, because we are in high desert, dry climate. And so water resource is very important. You may have seen in the news over the last year or two about Lake Powell levels being way down and Vegas, and what are they doing to address their water? And so water is something we're always really cognizant of, but we're able to make projects happen. So we look at jobs, return on investment, always post-performance. Almost always, I should say. There are some occasions, so like I talked to you very briefly about Port 15, which isn't part of the inland port. The way Port 15 was set up is that any new businesses that come to Port 15, the revenues generated from Port 15, a small portion of that goes back into the RDA, specifically to a pot of money, and we'll put it that way. Maybe that's not the best way to phrase it, but a pot of money or a line item where I can utilize that funding as incentive dollars. So if there's a new manufacturer, for example, American Pacific about a year and a half ago and GoEx both came to Cedar City. And that pool of money we were able to utilize to help them get across the finish line to build in that industrial area to address infrastructure needs and infrastructure costs, because there's a lot of costs related to infrastructure. So that's another thing we look at with projects. What infrastructure is available to where they're trying to build? What's the cost going to be? And is that area a priority for us? So for example, in retail, if a retailer wants to come to Cedar City, just wants to build where all the other retail is currently existing, we may not consider an incentive for that. But if there's a retailer that comes and wants to build on the north end of town where we have limited retail, no grocers, then the city may say, okay, well, we might consider that, but here are infrastructure needs. And so there's a few things that come into play. So jobs, infrastructure, what the area is, what the industry type is. So, if a manufacturer wants to come and build a chicken plant right next to a bunch of homes, I'm not so sure that's going to be a priority for the city council to want to incentivize, because they may not be in city council very long in that situation. Whereas if a chicken plant wanted to build, out in another area that wasn't near homes and things like that, and it was going to create jobs, well, then there might be more consideration. So sometimes there's hard line factors or objective factors, and other times there's subjective factors that come into play. And I always say that I'm the liaison that helps filter all those factors, create discussions and or buy-in, so that when it goes to city council, it's ready for them to adequately evaluate. An analogy that I like to give is, a lot of people say, well, why does economic development, why are they so top secret about everything? So, economic development directors aren't the top secret ones. It's all the businesses wanting to be top secret about, because they're looking at multiple areas. And the last thing a Costco wants is a community to get all excited about a Costco coming, but Costco chose to go to this other community or other area, and then people are mad at Costco, right? So my job is I have to keep confidences, and what I do is I help prep things. So like a planning and zoning that approve permits. If a business comes to them and presents their plans to planning and zoning, it doesn't just immediately go to city council. First, the city engineer and the city planner, maybe the building official, maybe the utilities, review those plans and say, well, per the ordinance, we need this additional information from you, or you can or can't do this per existing policy. So they give it back to them. And then as they have back and forth, when it's ready to go to the city council for decision, or the planning commission, depending on where those decisions are made, and it can vary from city to city, then it goes before the city council. And you may pull in a planning commissioner or a city council member or the mayor during that process while you're kind of helping them prepare it to go to the public meeting. But it's not secretive. That's just part of the process, because there's already policies in place that dictate what can and can't go in certain areas. So economic development is very much the same way. We're refining it so that we can get it ready, so that we don't bring an unfinished product, or not an unfinished product. Let me put it this way. If you have a Lego set, you don't want to take the Lego set and the box and dump it on the dais for the city council and say, City Council, we would like to build this Death Star Lego set here, but in order for you to see what it looks like, you have to put it together here right now in the meeting, and then you can know what we're trying to do. My job is to help put together that Lego set as accurately as possible, so that I can take it to the City Council meeting and the developer can say, this is what we're trying to do. Is this what you want to see in your community? And they can say yay or nay, or they can say, yeah, we want to see that, but we don't like that weak point in the Death Star. You may want to figure that out, or Luke Skywalker might blow it up. And maybe Death Star's not the right analogy to use, but that's the first one that came to me. But hopefully that analogy helps people see that my job is to help get things refined enough to present and say, this is what we're looking to do. Do you like it or not? And then ultimately, the city council is going to be the decision maker, or whichever body's over that. Some things are approved administratively through staff. Some things are go to the city planning commission and are approved on that level. Depending, incentives are almost always going to go to city council, or what we call our RDA here. And in Utah, the city council members are also the board members for our redevelopment agency. And so it's a different hat, but the same decision makers. So sometimes I'll use city council interchangeably there.
Understood. So we have, what was it? We have pot of money, we have Death Star
I
to
know, man,
amaze
it's sounding like
to amaze.
my pots of gold, at the end of the rainbow.
No, but that was very accurate, and I think to the one of the first things I actually said, I was like, you made it sound so simple. Now we're starting to see the complexities. You're putting all the pieces together. You have multiple different stakeholders that you would present certain things to, and then one of the things that I'm also very curious is like, how do you monitor the impact of like these subsidized projects? Now, on one, you said project, you're looking at the ROI. That's very numbers based. That's, I don't know what tools, I'll ask you, I guess, what tools you have. Very easy. But then some of the things are very qualitative that
Yeah.
you're looking at. So if you could kind of sum up just how you monitor the impact of those subsidized projects, like, and what tools you use for the quantitative and what do you use for something as qualitative as we won't be in council if we have a chicken plant next to a bunch of homes.
Yeah, right. The tools, in my opinion, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but the tools are really simple. Like, people think there's this huge analysis going on, and some places do really complicate it and create these huge analyses to determine things. I keep it simple. So it's post-performance. And so with the state, they have their TIF programs or their ed TIF programs or their red TIF programs, where essentially, did they create the number of jobs they said they would create? And whatever criteria that is placed on it, whether it's a TIF through the state or, say, a sales tax incentive through the city, or maybe a property tax incentive that is done interlocally with the city, the county, the water district, the school board, etc. So post-performance, determining like how much money they brought in and what's the agreement. I'll give you a really generic, simple example. So, for example, if you want to bring in a retail project in Utah and you want incentives, you want sales tax, like a rebate or a refund on that. A simple way to set it up is to say, okay, in Utah, for a retail incentive, you can only do that if you have a mixed use. There's an exemption for mixed use. And that exemption is 1 unit of residential for every 1,250 square feet of retail. And if you have a 30-acre, master planned area, as long as you have the unit per retail square footage ratio, you can do what's called, like, I call them a sales tax deferment. But essentially all it is saying, okay, if your company brings in, we'll say Sam's Club, for example, if Sam's Club brings in $200 million worth of tax or sales a year, the city's portion of that is going to be around $1 million a year. Sam's Club, we will refund you every year for the first 4 years, 90% of the sales tax that you bring in. And we will do that for 7 years up to $4 million. So if you hit $4 million in 5 years, then we're done. Or if you only hit $3 million in 7 years, we're done. And so that's a really simplified, generic form. Some cities waive, permitting fees or impact fees based on the level and scale of the project. Most cities administratively do not like to waive any fees because you don't want to set an unfair precedent. But what they'll do is say, okay, if your project brings in X number of jobs and contributes to it makes infrastructure improvements, X, Y, and Z, then we will look at waiving fees or discounting fees. And not every city has that established. Matter of fact, right now, we're trying to establish those types of parameters. And we've done things like that a lot in the manufacturing, but not in the retail area. And so those are areas that we're trying to refine and say, okay, well, how do we prioritize one retail project over another? Because yes, maybe we would want to incentivize a 40-acre retail development, but a 5-acre retail development, is that really the best use of public funds to incentivize that if it's only creating, 12 jobs? 12 jobs is important, but if you're going to incentivize, you want to use those taxpayer dollars to incentivize something that's going to have high impact. The other thing I will say to that is never incentivize using existing funds. only incentivize using new revenue. So that example I gave you was of the new revenue, Sam's Club, that you bring in, we will refund you back if you hit these marks X, Y, and Z. So you're not taking money from existing pool of taxpayer dollars that should go to the schools or to the roads and things like that. You're taking the burden off of your existing taxpayers and essentially shifting it on those entities that want to come and creating new tax revenue. After, if Sam's Club, if your city's generating $1 million of sales tax just to your city a year, and you've agreed to pay up to $4 million, well, after 4 years, the city is now bringing in $1 million more a year to help fund roads and streets, because that's what helps fund your general fund. Now, that's possible in Utah. Lots of states do not do sales tax. And so it's done through property tax. And it can be done through property tax here too. And I've used retail as an example, but we actually, Cedar City, Utah, Iron County, I should say, Utah, has the largest collection of solar projects in the state. And we've done those types of incentives with these solar projects because of the property tax that they generate. And matter of fact, we have so much solar in Utah, the county engineer did the math, and he said that of the operational projects and the projects in the queue, we could power half of the homes in the state of Utah with all the solar that exists in Iron County.
Just in Iron County?
And that's what I mean by we have a diverse portfolio of economic opportunity here. And sometimes it's not always about jobs. Sometimes it's about generating property tax, which is a stable tax, a stable form of income, where sales tax can fluctuate quite a bit depending on where the market's at. Yeah, so we got a lot going on here. Feel like I'm all over the board, Jonathan.
This has been very informative. And one thing that I think is important in that equation is how you're communicating the successes, how you're communicating what is being done with the taxpayer dollars, or in cases where it's future taxpayer dollars, how you're communicating that to your investors, as you put it earlier.
Yeah,
so
right.
What are some of the strategies you guys use to communicate those wins?
Well, I use LinkedIn and Facebook and things as far as to communicate the win, if that makes sense. Now, there's a whole level of communication in the process before shovels hit the ground and ribbons are cut. Of course, when ribbons are cut and ground is being broken and ribbons are cut, we're bragging all over social media, creating cool videos to say, here's all the jobs coming. But during that process, we're communicating in other ways. One of the biggest frustrations, I kind of highlighted this, I think just barely earlier, was people get frustrated because economic development, you can't always talk about all the things that are coming. Or you can't even always talk about it with all your elected officials. Sometimes I'm under NDA, non-disclosure agreements, where I can't talk about anything until the company is ready. And a lot of times that's because the company's still deciding, do they actually even want to come here? And then once a formal application is placed for permitting or for groundwork or whatever, that's when it becomes public and it starts going through those processes. And what can be frustrating for the public is like that behind the scenes discussions sometimes can take a year or 5 years of discussion before any application is put into place. And a lot of times frustrations of public or elected officials can be, well, how come I didn't know about this till right now? And my response is to that is, well, because it was a private company looking, and it wasn't public until they submit something publicly. And so it's not my project to go and talk about until something is submitted publicly. But here's what I do for the communication portion. So if a company is looking to come here, and I touched on this a little bit too, I roll out the red carpet. I do familiarization tours. I do site-specific tours. I will set up a meeting and NDAs if they need them signed with our utilities, with our universities, with the mayor, with the county, with whichever entities may be impacted by them and them by those entities. So for example, we've had several large projects looking at the area manufacturing, and there's one where European company were looking at the area, and to help them better understand the area and whether or not it would work here, We had Rocky Mountain Power, which is Pacificor, the gas company, Enbridge, which used to be, they've changed the company names a few times. I can't remember what it was, but it's Enbridge now. We had the Water Conservancy District. We had the industrial parks that they were looking at. We had the Utah Inland Port. We had county commissioners who were which is the elected body for where they're looking to go in the county. We had this whole table of people, decision makers, or people that are, or entities that are impacted. They're talking and saying, here's why Cedar City is beneficial. But in that same meeting, we said, while we're trying to sell ourselves to you, we need to know that you're actually the right fit for us. And so if they're a super huge water user, that's maybe it's not a stop, but maybe it's a red flag that we say, okay, tell us more about your water usage. And what are you going to do to help us build our infrastructure and make sure there's adequate resource and infrastructure to supply that water to you? And so we're equally vetting those entities to make sure that it's the right fit. And now I've completely lost track of kind of where we originated with that. But what I'm getting at, the communication side. So we're communicating throughout the whole process. And then if a company says, we want to go to Cedar City, Utah, then I say, okay, you've kind of spoken with our engineers, to kind of get an idea of what capacity is. You've spoken with utilities to get capacity ideas. Now you need to formally submit an application. And when that application is formally submitted, then that becomes part of the public process. Public process often involves going to like a concept review, going to planning commission, and it can go to planning commission back and forth a couple times with some feedback, and then going to a city council work meeting, and then going to a city council business meeting or regular session. And so there's a long public process. And so that's why there's a lot of legwork done beforehand, is so that if a company pulls the trigger to come, they already know what they're getting into, so that it helps speed things along during the public process. The public process can take as fast, depending on the size and scope of the entity, it can take as fast as a couple months, or it could take as long as a couple years. Because if there's state legislation or state mandates that impact them. So for example, that European company, and I've met with a couple different European companies, so I can be as nondescript as possible with that. We've done this a few times, but we had people from the state that ran the state incentives at the table. We had the Utah Inland Port at the table. So we had state entities at the table too, and the environmental oversight entities with the state were there as well. So communication is really important. And, as in government, there are so many different permits and processes, companies, residential builders coming through the queue. So a lot of times cities do what's required for public notice. Obviously, there's usually however many weeks are required by the state or your local community to public notice. If it's going to impact certain residential areas or other commercial areas, public notices will be sent out. Recently, our city council passed an ordinance that required us to send out additional notices. And so the problem is most people are looking at Facebook to find notice. And they're not looking at the public notice websites, and we don't have the capacity to, we have capacity to public notice on the required sites, but to share a Facebook post on every little permit application that comes through the city, that's all you would ever be reading. And so we put it on the website, and if people have questions, we say, okay, here's our website. You can go look what's gone through here, because our Facebook page, we would never be able to talk about our holiday lighting ceremony if all we did was post every little permit that came through the city, if that makes sense. And so as a public relations professional, that's where my background started. It's all about using the right tools to communicate the right things at the right time. And that's not trying to gatekeep or hide things. That's about helping educate people where to go to find the communication, to find the information that they're looking for about what's happening in their community. And I tell everyone, I'm the liaison, especially commercial. I'm the C3PO as well. Another Star Wars analogy. I translate to the developers what the planning and engineering is trying to do, and I translate to planning and engineering what the developers are trying to do, and then I'm conveying that that to then the city council and the public when those things, when they make it public. And then hopefully we're having fun ribbon cuttings. But not every project goes through. I mean, you work hard on projects sometimes. You spend hours or sometimes a couple of years on a project that in the end they decide not to come, or in the end elected officials or the community might decide you're not the right fit for us.
Dave, I definitely think now people see the nuance that I was teasing out. You are the communicator, the interpreter, the fixer.
I'm doing forecasting and analysis. If Sam's Club wants to come here, how much sales tax are they going to generate, and how much are we going to lose from our other businesses if they come, and what's going to be the offset with that? And you know what? I contract with attorneys or others to help me work through a lot of that nuance. I'm just kind of the orchestrator trying to bring all the pieces together, if that makes sense.
I like that. Now, I know you stated with a lot of things you're under NDA and aren't able to speak about it, but is there any upcoming initiative or program that you're just excited about, and what do you hope to achieve from it?
Well, you said program. Do you mean like a project or a company coming to the area, or just mean in general? Or?
It could be a company coming in. We are launching XYZ new initiative in the community that is going to incentivize small business. It could be a podcast that just started that is awesome. And I was actually
nice plug there. Thank you.
I really liked it. I told you that.
Yeah, that's great.
Just any initiative.
Yeah. So actually, we've talked a lot about the big things, right? And one of the hard parts for small businesses, sure, you're only going to incentivize the big business, right? That's not true. It's just there are different programs, funding, and mechanism that incentivizes big business. And then there's different programs, incentives, and mechanisms that support small business. Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, because every year we receive a pot of funding from the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. And we set aside, it's varied from year to year, but this year, for example, we set aside $65,000 of that to go towards small business grants. And we've done this, I think this is our third or fourth year. I think it's our third year. And we go through a process where small businesses can submit an application on a project that they have, and they can get a grant that's a 1-to-1 match of whatever their project is. And this year we set up to $30,000 they can request, but we only have $60,000 to distribute. So request wisely, right? So for example, the last 2 years, our first year of that program, it has been 3 years. First year of that program, of that grant program, we received about 20 requests. In the last 2 years, we've received over 40 requests and hundreds of thousands of dollars in requests, but we only have 65,000. So 65,000, 60 to go toward the grant, and then 5,000 to do cool promotional pieces about the grant winners. So for example, last year we had a local baker that needed a new oven, and we were able to grant that, and then they matched 1-to-1 on that, and they got a new oven. We had a catering business that was looking at opening their own brick and mortar area, and they were decking it out and getting the equipment that they needed. We had a videographer who's actually does my podcast with the city and the Office of Tourism. He was one of the grant recipients as well.
Nice.
Because he wanted to establish his own studio. And we had a guy that did a flooring company, and I know there's a couple others that we're missing. And this year we're going through that grant process again, and we have some amazing candidates. And the hardest part is when you have you get 46 applications and 30 of them are incredible. And then you have to narrow it down to, 15 applicants to move on to the full application process. And then you narrow it down. We just recently narrowed it down to 7 applicants to give presentations to our Iron County Economic Development Committee. And then that committee will decide which small businesses are going to receive the grant funding. And then we'll do a promotional video about the grant funding they receive when their project's done, and we'll ham it up about, look at this great business. Other granting opportunities that we have in our Main Street area, we have sign and facade and tenant grants. So on the historic downtown Main Street area, if you need a new sign and yours is getting old or sun bleached, because we have a lot of great sunshine here, you can get a new sign and we'll match dollar for dollar up to $2,500. Or if you're like, we want to redo the face of our building, we'll match up to $7,500 dollar for dollar. And that grant there's an application, but it's first come, first serve. And it's right now it's for the historic downtown Main Street areas. And we do that for Main Street of Cedar City and Main Street of Parowan, Utah. That's also in Iron County. And that may grow and expand in the future, where we may say, hey, we need to really help this area of the county or the city because there's a lot of rundown buildings there. And so we may in the future say, we're going to hone in on this area to help beautify the areas and help promote the businesses in those areas. So, but we have limited funds, so we kind of have to limit the areas that we do it in, because if some of those applications were open, I would have to, hire a whole slew of staff just to run the applications. But right now it's me and an executive assistant and then my volunteer committees.
Wow. I think you hit the nail on the head there. A lot of what people think when it's an economic development director is, the Sam's Clubs of the world coming in. How can you do more, give more to get them there? But you also show such a passion for the
grassroots.
Yes, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think you're putting your money where your mouth is, putting your time where your mouth is. I don't know if that's the phrase, but
money where your mouth is. That's right. You can run your mouth, but can you pay up and own up to what you're trying to do and say? Yeah.
So I think being able to do that for the small business community is incredible, and I know they appreciate it. And even just to the $5,000 additional. That's for creating that's marketing right there. They're getting marketing from their local government, and I'm sure it's a quality video. So I'm super excited to hear that.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, everything can't be easy and great. So I'd love to maybe hear if there are any challenges that you face, or if maybe in a positive way, if you could snap your fingers and fix or change one thing in your role, or in your day-to-day, what would that potentially be?
Well, there's a few different, yes, they're challenges, but they're not impossible challenges. So maybe I'll kind of talk through that and then tell you the one thing that if I could fix and I'm working diligently on, actually. So we have challenges, like I mentioned, there's water, right? There's power issues throughout the state with Pacificor and Rocky Mountain. And I said that like a true Utah, Rocky Mountain, rather mountain. Rocky Mountain Power, housing, affordability is an issue. Is there enough workforce in the area? Sure, we have those challenges. Everywhere in Utah has those challenges, and I would say most places in the West and the United States have those challenges. How do you work through those challenges? Or how do you work through and address those challenges? The real challenge that I would say we have in Iron County and Cedar City is a subjective challenge. And that is perception. Cedar City historically and Southern Utah has always been very rural community. St. George, Washington County, south of us, is where everybody in Northern Utah goes for their winter vacations because it's sunny and, and a lot to do there, warm weather. But this area is growing. Washington County is growing exponentially, but Cedar City, Iron County, we're growing quite a bit. So last year, for example, and hopefully I'm remembering these numbers off the top of my head correctly, we had around 700 new certificates of occupancy for residential units, which we have an average of 3.07 residents per unit in our city. And so that equates to, I think it's around 2,200, somewhere around there, new residents just last year. And so one of our challenges is companies think and business leaders think that Cedar City and Iron County is still just this rural little kind of pass-through community. Cedar City right now is around 40,000, and we are kind of the hub of of Iron County. Iron County is around 60,000, 65,000. So almost most of the people in Iron County live in Cedar City, right? So you may look at that as a retailer and say, well, you don't have the numbers I'm looking for. Costco wants, or this is the numbers they used to want, is 110,000 population in a 5-mile radius. And you're not going to get that here. But what they don't know are some of the subjective things, which some of them are objective as well. Subjectively, we are a rural hub here. And then objectively, what I can tell you is that the counties, the surrounding rural counties, come and shop here in Cedar City. And what they can't find here, they go to Washington County, St. George. So for example, our Walmart here in Cedar City for a long time has always been the number one grossing Walmart in the state of Utah, with a population of only 40,000. Wow. And I think right now we may have got bumped down to number 2. If the recent numbers that I checked are accurate, I need to verify. But the reason why that is people from a 90-minute plus radius drive here to shop here, because our neighbors 90 minutes north of us or west of us, they don't have a grocery store. Or if they do, it's a small grocer and doesn't meet all their needs. And so we have a large radius of people, even from Nevada, that are in the sticks of Nevada on the border, Utah-Nevada border, that will drive here to do their grocery shopping. And so for another example along those lines, a major grocer was looking at Cedar City, and a developer that they were working with wanted to show them how they would be successful. Well, this major grocer thought we were still not much bigger than 10,000 population. So the developer said, okay, tell us your preferred analyst. And the grocer said, okay, this is our preferred analyst. They used that grocer's third-party preferred analyst. And the results that came back showed that Cedar City, if that grocer were to build a grocery store here, would be their number one grossing store in the state. And so the hurdle that I'm trying to overcome is the perception of what we have always historically been and what we are now becoming. Now, a dual hurdle with that is the opposite. Locals who have lived here generationally love it, and they want to keep the integrity of the community. And they don't want to be a Chicago or an LA, right? Rightfully so. When I joked earlier that I'm the Goldilocks, it's because Cedar City has the right balance of what I want. And so it's also educating the public and getting feedback from the public of how do we want our community to grow. A lot of people get very knee-jerk reaction. Well, if you build new homes and if you bring new businesses, that's going to completely change the way our community looks. Well, what I always say is good planning doesn't say turn into a metropolis. Good planning says this is how we want our community to grow. So when you're building new homes, it's not just about all the Californians or people from out of state moving here. It's also about building homes so your kids can stay and live here. When it's bringing new business to the area, it's not really about bringing all of these out-of-towners to come live here. It's about creating high-quality, high-paying jobs so when your kids graduate college, they can live here, right? They can work here and stay here. And so my job is to help tell both those stories about how we have opportunity here that's untapped, and how that opportunity doesn't mean we're going to just turn into something that we don't want. Now, there'll always be those who want it just farmland. And what I say is that's property rights. If a farmer wants to sell their property to a business to build it for something, that's their prerogative to do. I in the city don't make that decision for them. So regionally, what I've done to help communicate and go over that hurdle is not only telling our story, like doing a podcast about how great it is here, promoting our small business on the podcast, our manufacturers, our tourism, our quality of life, but I've been working with my peers regionally in southern Utah to form a regional economic development organization. And I've also been working with the state. And my peers down in Washington County and St. George, they've been amazing to work with and amazingly humble. And they've always had a big conference there, and we have a big conference here to promote economic development. And they hired a consultant to say, let's look if our regional or if our economic development organization here should be expanded regionally. And just recently, we were awarded money from the state to have a regional economic development organization so that we can promote all of Southern Utah. It's no longer just the pass-through vacation community or the pass-through rural community. We can promote this as a region that has rail, that has airports, that has Division I universities, that has a workforce and a manufacturing hub that can compete with other major markets like Vegas and others in the Western area. Yes, we're not as big as them, but our opportunity is here to provide for manufacturers what they're not going to find in a Vegas market or some of these other markets. And that's the balance between business and quality of life, right? That's what you're not going to find. And keeping the integrity of that quality of life that we have here and not letting it turn into an LA or a Vegas, along with not all the regulations that you see in some of these other major Western markets. And so I've been working with my peers to help better create a communication to tell our market story and say, hey, Southern Utah, we're here to compete and we're here to offer great things. Now, if there's other places in Utah or other, sister areas that get wins, great. That's a great win. But we're here to really show what we have to offer and show that, we're not just this little rural community that some think it is. And so overcoming that has been interesting. And I honestly thought it would take 5+ years to overcome some of those humps and those perceptions and create the buy-in. But my peers that I've worked with down in Southern Utah totally agree, and I'm putting words in their mouth, but have totally jumped on board and agree. And I think they were already thinking the same thing. So I can't really take credit for it. And that's what I said earlier. My successes aren't my successes. They're the successes of who do you bring to the table and who do you bring in that has the skill and the knowledge to create the buy-in and create the successes that, like they say, high tides help float all ships, right? And so that's the effort that we're trying to do. Anyways, I can blab all day on that.
I love it. I think you hit two things that I was very interested in understanding. One was, what is the challenge? And it's the perception. I think you displayed that it's not just the perception of incoming parties looking to potentially make Cedar City their home, but it's also the perception of the community. If we build these things, are we going to turn into LA? Where we're bringing a ton of people from California, which is a positive in certain things, but we don't want it to turn into what people were actually leaving.
Right.
So the perception. And then my next question was going to be the vision, and your passion bled through your vision. If I'm comparing it correctly, your vision of Cedar City in Southern Utah is one of regionalism, in the sense that when I think of economic development, it's sometimes that competition or almost co-opetition type thing. But no, you're bringing it together collectively to show the power of what you guys can do, from having rail, having an airport, having a D1 university, and having so much to offer. And that collective story actually, and I think what you said was, so rising tides raise all ships. Together, you guys are able to bring a collective story that will bring new development, will be able to support what your communities hold dear currently.
Right.
And that regional economic development organization, I applaud, and I hope even after this, I'll be able to swing back and see how that's going, because you clearly have the passion, the information. I'm very proud and thankful that you took the time to speak to me today.
Yeah. And the name of that organization, if people listening to this are interested in learning more about it, we're formalizing it more, because right now it's been under Washington County and it's got its own nonprofit designation, but it'll be separating from the county so that it will be privately led and publicly supported, is the idea behind it. So business leaders are going to be, running that organization, hopefully with an executive director, etc. But the name of it's the Southern Utah Economic Alliance. So Utah is kind of what we've called it, like SoCal, I guess. We're pretty hip around here. So people may not think Utah hip, but you come here and you'll see some hipsters, I promise.
Definitely. Well, definitely. I appreciate that. So where can people that, similar to me, love your passion, love your story, love what you're doing for Utah, where can they reach out to you? Could you please drop the podcast? Because I want people to actually go and look like I did, where can we get in touch with you personally? And then any other platforms that we should be looking at?
Yeah, so the podcast is called Explore Local Podcast, or I think on Instagram it's just Explore Local Pod. And there's a few, I think, podcasts or whatever that have similar names. Just type in Cedar City, Explore Local Podcast, Cedar City. And you can go look there. It's on Instagram, YouTube, the iTunes. Is that what they still call it these days? iTunes, right?
Apple Podcast.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts. Yeah, this is giving me away. I'm an Android user. I used to have the first 4 iPhones, but now I'm an Android user. Anyways, you can look on Spotify for the podcast. Economic development, just type in Cedar City, Iron County Economic Development, and you can pull up our website there. We have a Facebook page. LinkedIn is where we're pretty active, because in economic development, LinkedIn is the social media of choice, because that's where businessmen and men and women, I should say, and decision makers are looking. So yeah, go there, give me a call. My contact information's on the website. You can have a look there. My staff and I are happy to help you walk through. If you want to come out to the area, you, Jonathan, or a business or someone listening, if you want to come out and look at the area and considering this area for business, let me know. I'm happy to work with our partners in the community. Shakespeare Festival has said, any business looking to come to the area, let them know, and they're happy to give them a behind the stage tour and have them, attend some of the productions. And just so people know, Shakespeare Festival is not just Shakespeare theater. This year they did 47 Steps. They did, now it's slipping my mind, on my podcast, I interviewed a couple of the actors, but the plays they were in, or the productions they were in, I'm slipping my mind, but one was about Martin Luther King. Another was about some of these women who looked into astrology. So I digress again, but happy to help show off, happy to take you on a great hike to some amazing waterfalls. If you want to go hit up our ski resort, Bryan Head Ski Resort, like if you guys are looking to this area, we'll roll out the red carpet. We'll show you the sites for manufacturing or retail, and we'll take you out for a good day. Take you to the historic downtown for some good food and shopping as well. So
good. I appreciate it. And I know our listeners definitely appreciate you. I hope they all at least check out the podcast and a better opportunity to go out and actually see Cedar City like I want to. So thank you again for joining the Jentry Podcast. We appreciate your time. And this was incredible. And I look forward to learning more. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great. Nice to get to know you.
Pleasure.